This was the controller for the first home video game console. Look at the size of that thing. A decade after that, Nintendo introduced the world to the joys of the D-pad and the birth of the controller as we know it. And in the 30 years since then, controller design has come a long way. Or has it? In 2017, a technology design researcher measured some of the most popular controllers from the past 25 years against ergonomic standards for things like dials and buttons to see whether controllers have gotten more ergonomic as games have gone more mainstream. None of the controllers perfectly matched the proper ergonomic dimensions for things like button size and button spacing. This is an interesting study, but of course, lab measurements and ergonomic design standards don't tell the whole story. After all, the very first controllers created for the game Space War were modeled on railroad switches. They were developed as workarounds to the complicated inputs for the PDP-1 computer, and they were more about solving a computer engineering input problem than a human design problem. And the more you dig into the stories behind the most iconic controllers, the more you see that controller designs are anything but exercises in pure ergonomics. PlayStation's DualShock is one of the best-loved controllers on the market, and it almost didn't exist. When Sony began work on PlayStation in 1993, they were entering the console wars with an eye to take down the king. Super Nintendo! In order to make it easy for Nintendo players to switch over to PlayStation, Sony management wanted a controller that had the same flat style as Nintendo's. Instead, designer Teyu Goto came back with this curvy design with 2 grips. Management hated it. They overruled Goto and went ahead with a flat controller, even going so far as to pour the molds. But Sony's president, Norio Oga, had followed the controller design process with close interest. Oga was a classically trained musician, here he is casually conducting a Schubert symphony, and he also happened to be an accomplished jet pilot. He liked Goto's design because it gave him a 3D feel for the game, similar to when he was flying a plane. When management showed Oga the flat design, he was livid. Goto was afraid Oga was going to chuck the flat prototypes at the management team. The curved shape that became the classic PlayStation controller might never have been born if Oga hadn't intervened. And his appreciation for the design wasn't about standard ergonomic measurements, it was about the feeling of connectedness between hardware, human, and game. That same feeling guided Nintendo in their development of the N64 controller. Legendary game developer Shigeru Miyamoto understood the controller and the game were one. Without the controller, there is no game, really. Miyamoto's vision for the gameplay of Mario 64 and the free exploration of that open 3D world led Nintendo to innovate analog control sticks. If you pressed gently, Mario would tiptoe. If you pushed the stick all the way, he would sprint. But what's with the 3-pronged shape? The Nintendo 64 controller had to remain usable and simple, but it also had to allow room for game developers to start innovating with the new graphics power the console was unleashing. So, no, they didn't think anybody had 3 hands when they designed this controller. They just figured people could use the 2 outer grips to access the D-pad for old-school classic-style games, and they could grip the center and right sides to use the analog stick to interact in new ways with whatever new games the developers dreamed up. More computing power was partly to blame for the colossal first Xbox controller.
Let me now unveil Xbox.
When Microsoft released the Xbox in 2001, the controller that got shipped to North American customers was the Duke.
Actually putting the control in their hands. We tried out over 100 different form factors, to find what was the most comfortable and would give them the best gameplay.
It was 3 times bigger than Sony's controller, and Microsoft killed it off after just a year, replacing it with their smaller controller for the Japanese market. Why did it ever ship such a massive controller to begin with? As soon as concept sketches for the Xbox controller were completed, the circuit boards that would power the controller were manufactured based off those drawings. The circuit boards were huge, and they weren't going to go away. So the designer had to find a way to work around them. Her solution was to lean into making the controller as comfortable as possible, even if it was huge. She departed from what had been standard controller layout and offset the analog sticks to better fit the natural position of the thumbs, a design move that proved lasting and well-loved. That doesn't mean these companies don't take ergonomics and user testing into account. In a 2010 interview with a Japanese gaming magazine, Teyu Goto said Sony spent more time designing the PlayStation controller than the console itself. Microsoft spent $100 million on R&D for an update to the Xbox 360 controller. They built hundreds of prototypes. Some were pretty out there. One that would release smells, one that would beam an immersive projection around the player. In the end, after those millions of dollars and hundreds of prototypes, the new controller looked largely similar to the old one, but they had made some key changes to help the hardcore players internally referred to as the golden hands. For the Xbox One, the sticks were given rubberized grips to help keep thumbs from slipping, and they shaved down the disc-shaped D-pad into more of a plus sign that would feel like separate keys so that you could quickly switch just by the feel. Face buttons got closer together so you could switch between them more quickly. They also adjusted the angle of the trigger and shoulder buttons, turning them slightly outward and making them bigger. This was specifically about ergonomics. These new triggers better fit the natural angle of the fingers. The PlayStation team similarly made these fine-grained ergonomic adjustments between the DualShock 3 and 4. Through user testing, they saw that when it came to the D-pad, there were two kinds of players: folks who hit it from the sides and people who hit the D-pad starting from the center. Both groups complained of fatigue and discomfort after a couple of hours. So the new D-pad had gently sloping buttons and a concave place for the thumb to rest comfortably. So they do go through rigorous testing. Now, despite all of that, pro players are still pushing the hardware and their bodies to the absolute limit.
That's right. For one Super Smash Bros. Player, the strain of playing led to arthritis at just 23 years old.
2 years ago, I was sitting in a doctor's office and it was being made clear to me that I would never play this game again. And I told the doctor that I was going to find a way. In recent years, I've become really well known for this box controller that I developed. This is a controller that allows people to enjoy Melee without experiencing some of the ergonomic concerns that they would normally have to go through.
Will we ever see a complete redesign of one of the flagship controllers from Sony or Microsoft? Probably not, given how such intensely loyal player bases develop once players have put the hours in to master a particular interface. Game scholar Dan Parisi argues that the shape of the controller has become a haptic extension of the brand, and what more intimate way to connect with your customers than the way a gamer melds with the controller? For more esports coverage, tune into Cheddar Esports on Fubo TV. Hit the comments to let us know your favorite controller design, what you think makes for a good game controller, what you think controllers might look like in the future. Like, subscribe, hit the bell icon to get notified when Cheddar puts out a new video. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.